Good evening, all. Welcome back to the digital platform of Sadhan Chandra Mahavidyalaya. We are happy to announce that we are back with session number 22. In this session, we are lucky to have another distinguished guest on our platform. And who is he? Already know that he is very reputed academician. Uh, he is Dr. Shiv Shankar Mojumdar from Assam University. So, without further delay, I would like to take him on the screen. So I would like to welcome officially Dr. Mujumdar on our digital platform.
Thank you
Dr.
very much,
Shiv,
Gautam.
we welcome you on our digital platform. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. So before he commences his lecture, I would like to uh, inform all of you his academic career. Dr. Sipsokar Mujumdar is assistant professor in Department of English, Assam University, Silchar. His doctoral thesis is titled Political Theatre in Kolkata, uh, Battles of Brecht in Context. He specializes in the areas of drama, theatre, and performance studies, literature in English, from India's Northeast, partisan and issues of migration in Eastern India. He has published research articles in various reputed journals enlisted with UTC and KF. He has also contributed chapters in edited books. So we are very lucky to have this great academician amongst us. So today, he is going to deal with a topic. This topic is on your screen. Yes, this is on your screen. He's going to deliver a lecture on China in Brechtian imagination and intercultural reading of the good person of Sichuan. So, Professor Majumdar, are you ready?
Yes, yes, you may begin.
Okay. Okay, all the participants who are watching him right now, if you have any question, you can ask him. I know you know, all of you know that our procedure. You can drop your question in the comment box, and after his insightful lecture, we'll get back to him with the question, and he will definitely answer your questions. So let's begin our that insightful lecture that we have been waiting for a long time. So, Professor Majumdar, over to you.
Uh, at the outset of this particular lecture that I am going to deliver, I first of all want to convey my deepest regards to the principal of Sadhan Chandra Mahavidyalaya College and the HOD of the Department of English of that college, Gautam Maji, who has invited me on this platform to share some of my thoughts on Bertolt Brecht and especially his play, Good Person of Sichuan, with you. So, Gautam has given very generous introduction of mine. I am a very humble teacher, teaching over here in Assam University for last 10 years. So today's this lecture, uh, the lecture has two parts. First of all, at the outset, I'm going to speak some of the tricky issues about intercultural theater, especially in relation to the author, the playwright Bertolt Brecht, who is widely regarded as possibly the best playwright of 20th century, and his representation of China in a play called The Good Person of Sichuan. Uh, and in the second part of my lecture, I am going to focus on the textual issues and especially how Brecht has actually uh, worked on the materials that he has collected from China and how he has transformed those things in order to shape his play. So, without much ado, I am going to begin my presentation. Hopefully, you would enjoy this. The term intercultural theater has caught the attention of theater and performance study analysts during the previous century. Uh, though aspects of interculturalism has been there in theater from late medieval times. The concept of intercultural theater is premised on the idea that all theater traditions are unique and embedded in their particular cultural systems, as a result of which it is possible to separate one's own theater from other theaters, says Erika Fischer Lickste, one of the prominent theater theoreticians of our time. During the 1960s and 1970s, one could witness an increased contact of theatrical art forms of Asia and Africa with those of the West because of increased mobility between the continents. Regardless of how similar or different these traditions were, there was always a possibility of an intercultural interaction. This interaction happened primarily through transfer of texts, acting styles, aesthetic principles, and artistic techniques from one theater culture to another. Uh, the Rutledge Companion to Theatre and Performance Studies defines interculturalism as cultural interaction which confronts or combines the practice of one culture with others. Intercultural theatre and performance can thus be understood as referring more accurately to hybrid activities rather than to specific genres of performance. Uh, This book further says that interculturalism partly arose in the West following the sympathy for multicultural integration, which arose as a response to increased desire, and I quote, to articulate cultural differences, unquote, fueled by postmodernism. In a book titled Theatre Studies, Kenneth Pickering and Mark Woolger defines the term intercultural theatre as theatrical praxis where, I quote, the exploration of performance styles and practices and the use of texts from a wide variety of cultural and ethnic groups, unquote, are blended together. Quote, in an attempt to understand other ways of living and doing, unquote. So this other ways of living and doing is very important in the context of my today's lecture. uh, Intercultural theater thrived, as I have said, for many, many centuries. But during 20th century, there were some very important practitioners of intercultural theater, uh, especially from Europe. And these are theater directors and theater theoreticians like Atwa Arto, Bartolt Brecht, Peter Brook, Eugenio Barba, Georgi Grodsky, Richard Schechner, and a few others. The term intercultural has been primarily used by them commonly to describe the influence of practice from southeast or third world on those of the north, west, or the first world. So it was primarily for them a one-way traffic. But as the century went on, we found that practitioners from Asia and Africa, they were also experimenting in this particular vein. Uh, as in the cases of Nigerian playwright Wolsoinka, who combines narratives from classical Greek and Shakespearean drama with local Yoruba myths of Africa, and Tadashi Suzuki of Japan, who directs Western plays using Asian performance techniques. Uh, Intercultural theater, it seemed, thrived for a particular point of time uh, uh, because it could develop indigenous practices, it could lead to the creation of hybrid new performance forms and expressions, and it could help facilitate the understanding of different cultures. It is particularly significant in the Indian context because those who of us are the students of Indian theatre, we know that this whole edifice of modern theatre in India has been imported from the West. So that is why intercultural theatre should be of primarily interest for us. As a direct impact of colonization, many Asian and African nations imported theatre styles from the West uh, during 18th and 19th century as an impact of colonization. Uh, Towards the end of 20th century, we found a few voices surfacing who criticized who criticized rather some of the aspects of intercultural theatre. There has been accusations of exploitation, lack of respect, and reciprocity against these practitioners. Many of these European practitioners, there has been accusations of exploitation and lack of respect as far as other traditions were concerned, the Asian and African traditions are concerned. Some have argued that it exoticizes third world culture and represents it as commodity, often trivializing and denigrating shores culture as cliche or stereotype. Some Western performances have represented Asian and African forms as primitive, which is a very loaded term. As a form of cultural representation, intercultural theater is susceptible to misrepresentations. Uh, Peter Brook's phenomenal production of Mahabharata, which is one of the prominent examples of intercultural experimentation, uh, uh, has been accused of misrepresentation of certain Indian ethos by Rustam Varucha. Varucha, in a book called Theatre and the World, he says, and I quote him, that Eurocentric and Orientalist premises have been used by Peter during his production of certain intercultural performances, which cannot be completely separated from the, and I quote Varucha, larger context of cultural colonialism and the ethics of cross-cultural misrepresentation, unquote. Uh, Erika Fischer-Lickstay, I'm coming to her next. Theater anthropologist Erika Fischer-Lickstay opines that concept of intercultural theater makes false assumptions, quote unquote, that cultures are sealed entities. Once Japanese, always Japanese. Once European, always European. She is primarily arguing against this particular stereotype. Instead, cultures are immersed in a continuous process of change and exchange. In a post globalized world order, it is difficult to disentangle or distinguish what is one's quote unquote own and what is quote unquote foreign. The differences between cultures are dynamic and continuously shifting. So the present impression is that as an aesthetic performative category, this is the present or the contemporary presumption about intercultural performances. Many of us, we hold this particular opinion that as an aesthetic performative category, intercultural theater is deeply problematic, which requires nuanced understanding and closer introspection. So that's how I like to build up the theoretical premise of my today's lecture. And my reading of Bertolt Brecht's The Good Person of Sichuan is based in this particular context. As I talk more, I think the issues are going to unfold. Keeping these characteristics and problematics of intercultural theater in mind, in the following section of this lecture, I am going to speak on Brecht's representation of China and Chinese cultural systems in The Good Person of Sichuan. Among the German dramatists of early 20th century, Bertolt Brecht was by far the most preoccupied artist concerned with Chinese culture, literature, and history. Though Brecht never traveled to China, but he had considerable knowledge about Chinese literature, culture, and philosophy, which is richly reflected in his creative writings. Some scholars speculate that his introduction to Chinese culture and history might have been augmented by his habit of reading. Brecht had this physical issue, so he could not move about frequently. So much of his time he would devote to reading. He was a voracious reader. Of the various texts available on China in German and English at that period of time, I mean early 20th century, on which one of which might have drawn Brecht's attention to China is titled Record of the Tartar War, authored by Martin Martini, an Italian Jesuit priest who had been there in China for a very long period of time. So after his return to Europe, he has written a book called The Record of the Tartar War. This we can assume that was one of the basic books which might have given Brecht a whole idea about culture and the geography of China. The plots of Bertolt Brecht's plays like Measures Taken, written in the year 1930, The Caucasian Chalk Circle, 1945, and then the book called published 1965 but conceptualized earlier. These show that Brecht was heavily into China, that he has written extensively on Chinese themes and issues. The most widely read and frequently quoted essay authored by Brecht on epic theater, titled Alienation Effects in Chinese Acting, written in the year 1936, is a product of his introspection on the aesthetics of classical Chinese theater. In 1940, Brecht wrote another essay titled On the Theater of the Chinese. These essays prepared the ground for his formulation of the principles of dialectical theater, which he eventually developed. It is also popularly alternately known as epic theater. Uh, Another very significant encounter as far as Chinese culture is concerned was Brecht's chance meeting with a Chinese classical theater artist called Mei Lanfang, which is a very very eventful, which is a very very significant event in the life of Brecht. Brecht has met Mei Lanfang in Moscow in 1935. So these are the primary forays, to my mind, that Brecht was actually making into Chinese literature, culture, and history. During the 1920s, Brecht was grappling with the idea of writing a parable play based on the conflict of human identity. However, in spite of frequent attempts, he did not progress successfully, since he could not resolve a host of artistic and technical issues involving the plot of this play. Uh, so he kept on postponing the task of completing it. An entry in Brecht's journal dated March 15, 1939 tells us, and I'm quoting Brecht over here. He says, just the other day, I pulled out The Good Person of Sichuan. Of the five acts, four are salvageable. Writing this particular work was like trying to solve a riddle, because there were scenes in which costumes are changed and makeup is redone. So this is eventually, we are talking about 1939. Within another 1 or 2 years, Brecht is going to complete the third draft of this play, popularly known as uh, the play The Good Person of Sichuan. For more than 2 decades, Brecht and his small team of collaborators, comprising of two very important collaborators that Brecht had, Ruth Berlau and Margaret Steffin, they kept on editing, altering, adding, and reimagining certain crucial aspects of this play. They used, they also toyed with several titles for this play, like Fanny Class, the only friend of a prostitute, and then it was given a different title subsequently called Love as a Commodity. Brecht would begin working in earnest on the third and the final draft of this play uh, from May 1939 and completed it by 1941. The third draft, popularly known as the Santa Monica version, which was written in the US, United States of America, is now widely considered to be the standard one. Though, as we have already possibly understood, that there are two other earlier versions of this play. Brecht's play from 1940s shows his continuous engagement and evolving approach to China. In a letter dated 5th May 1940, addressed to Hans Stambrock, a German painter, Brecht reveals the reason for choosing uh, Sichuan as the setting for this play. And Brecht tells him that it was provoked by the prevailing political situation in China. The rise of communist forces and the Second Sino-Japanese War, which lasted from 1937 to 45, in China, regularly captured the headlines in European newspapers. Chengdu, the capital of Sichuan province, was one of the principal sites of both these struggles. The Sino-Japanese War, as well as the war between the Kuomintang and the communists in China. In Brecht's play, there is no reference to Chengdu. In fact, the only Chinese city mentioned in this text, the Good Person of Sichuan, is Beijing. There is no reference to Chengdu, but then there are frequent references to Sichuan. This is interesting. Brecht's Sichuan is neither situated in medieval times nor in communist China. So I am just now trying to identify, or I'm trying to understand, relate to you the historical and the geographical identity of this place that Brecht has used, I mean Sun. It is a thoroughly capitalist dystopia driven by the energies and desires of emerging middle class. Much like a city in modern China, as he specifies the look for the setting of the play, he informs us through his journal, which I'm going to quote within a few minutes of time. But then, just I'm trying to add over here is the fact that one should not confuse possibly the historical Sichuan, the real geographical place, the state which is there in China, with the Sichuan that Brecht, presents or represents in the text. So how this dichotomy, how this thing actually is being brought into this play, we will try to understand this by reading a note which has been left to us by Brecht, and I'm going to quote him. The city must be a big, dusty, uninhabitable place. So that is what Brecht tells his compatriots, the possible production directors in future. So he specifies the city, he specifies the setting of this particular place. The city must be a big, dusty, uninhabitable place. Some attention must be paid to countering the risk of shinosheri. I mean, too much of embellishments as far as Chinese art and craft should not be there on the stage. The vision of a city's outskirts with cement works and so on. There are still gods around, because in this particular play, as many of us we know that there are three gods, Chinese gods, that they appear, and this particular hint that has been dropped to us by Brecht is very, very critical. So it is going to give us some very important idea as far as the text is concerned, because Brecht creates an imaginary Sichuan in which one can still see gods coming to earth, but aeroplanes have already come. You know, aeroplanes are being talked about in this particular play, and the protagonist Shante, her beloved in this particular play, he is a pilot. There are still gods around, but aeroplanes have come. Perhaps the lover, by which Brecht means the lover of Shante, should be an unemployed pilot. Unquote. For most Western spectators, the good person of Sichuan is undeniably Chinese because of its title and setting, whereas Brecht tries to strike a balance between, quote, the Chinese reality, unquote, and, quote, the reality of China, unquote, as Western spectators would like to imagine. So there is this play between these two things, which is absolutely very crucial and critical as far as reading this play is concerned. The Chinese reality, the play between the Chinese reality and the reality of China as would be imagined by the spectators from Europe or spectators from non-Chinese, non-Asian traditions. His allusions to China, Sichuan can simultaneously be attributed to two complementary and conflicting aims: a fictionalized account of an imaginary Sichuan, which allows him to refer to the advancement of communist movements, and a leverage to, quote, selectively utilize the collective Western cultural imaginary about China, unquote. One could say that Brecht creates a perfect veneer in this play for China or Sichuan, which freely crisscrosses the line between the real and the imagined. We can see the fusion of ancient cultural beliefs, that is the three Chinese gods, with modern machinery. I mean, there are references to the postal delivery system and the aeroplanes. An atmosphere of ambivalence permeates the play, in which Sichuan is used as a metaphor, a convenient trope. Through this trope of feigned exoticism, Brecht wanted to conceal the real significance of China and Chinese culture in the play behind a carefully constructed Chinese exterior. it would not be erroneous to observe that Brecht wanted the locale of the good person of Sichuan to be believable but not necessarily realistic. However, the amount of revisions Brecht undertook to create a Chinese veneer challenges any one-dimensional understanding of the Chinese setting as merely interchangeable or inconsequential, as he informed to his another collaborator called Caspar Naha. Brecht tells him, I quote, we, I mean, he refers to his team of collaborators, Ruth Berlau and Elizabeth Hoffman. We are still mulling over the problem: bread and milk or rice and tea for the Sichuan parable. Many European spectators or those who do not belong to the Chinese cultural tradition, uh, they believe that this play is situated in China, so everything about this play has to be Chinese. But Brecht has only taken the setting and used it in a very creative dialectical fashion, I must say. So for a very long time, he has been grappling with some very minor issues. But for Brecht, these issues were absolutely very critical. Uh, So whether on the stage should bring or milk or rice and tea is customary in the Chinese tradition, that was one thought which was occurring in the mind of Bertolt Brecht, as he informs to Caspar Naha. He says the yellow race eating white French bread is not possibly something which is European spectators are going to take very lightly. Uh, in The Good Person, Brecht invokes ancient China in order to criticize modern society and encourage social reform. The fictional nature of the play provides Brecht with the artistic freedom to create a China that lies somewhere between the historical reality and poetic fiction. China in The Good Person exists between the poles of imagination and historico political reality. Brecht takes full advantage of its ambiguous nature, deliberately obscuring his engagement with China oblique Sichuan for challenging the spectators to decipher the significance of this parable based on their own understanding. This is the very fundamental, I should say, ethos of dialectical theater, that it must provoke the spectators to think, to exercise his own rational faculties. So Brecht is actually doing that. Richard Wilhelm's translation of Mengzi. Mengzi is a very famous medieval Chinese philosopher. Mengzi's On Human Nature was published in Germany in 1916. Brecht used ideas, motifs, and quotations from A. Mengzi even in his earlier works. So I have told, I have already informed towards the very beginning of my lecture that Brecht was a voracious reader. And I'm just presuming that Brecht must have read these books, and he must have used some of these ideas as I'm going to present before you in his plays. In his earlier plays which he has written considerably earlier to the Good Person of Sichuan. Say, for example, in Three Penny Opera, he borrowed a dictum from Mengzi, which goes like this: first the grub, then the morality. The very hardcore Chinese philosophy, and applied is a very characteristic. I pardon for using spelling called hardcore. I think I should say characteristic, and applied as a governing motif in this play. I mean, he applies this particular motif called first the grub, then the morality. We are reminded of a character called Mac the Knife and his very cutthroat attitude. In Mother Courage and Her Children, again another play which was written before The Good Person of Sichuan, Elif the soldier justifies his action with a remark. And Elif says, after all, who thinks of morality when one is hungry. This is another idea that Brecht is believed to have borrowed from Mengzi. These references show that Brecht was familiar with Mengzi much before initiating the play called The Good Person of Sichuan. Nevertheless, his use of elements from Chinese, Brecht was possibly reading a book titled The Three Ways of Thought in Ancient China, authored by British sociologist Arthur Waley, when he conceptualized the plot of The Good Person of Sichuan. This book includes a quotation from Mengzi, and just allow me to read out this quotation to you, very small one. This book says, "On the goodness of human nature," that is the title of that section in Arthur Waley's book, where Mengzi writes that it is difficult to be good. It is difficult to be a good person in a society full of evil. To my mind, this is the this is the core idea. Uh, this is the central idea on which the logic of this particular play, the plot of this particular play called The Good Person of Sichuan revolves. It goes, and I will just repeat it another time for better understanding. It is difficult to be a good person in a society full of evil. These are all Mengzi thoughts which Brecht is believed to have used, especially on the text which he has written on China. Otherwise, also, as I have already told, that he has used some certain ideas in the Three Penny Opera and Mother Courage. In the character of Shen Te, who is the protagonist in the Good Person of Sichuan, sympathetic, warm-hearted doer of good works, without doubt, was a reflection of Mengzi's thought. And what is that thought? People are good, just as water flows downward. This is in another Mengzi thought. Mengzi tells us people are good just as water flows downward. There are no people without good, just as there is no water that does not flow downward. Unquote. So this is, I believe, is a beautiful thought. Mengzi is an optimistic person. He says that people are habitually, naturally good until and unless the circumstance is otherwise, which I believe is the governing logic of this particular play called The Good Person of Sichuan. Of course, it is more than that. Nevertheless, his use of elements from Chinese culture, Brecht's use, I mean, Chinese culture, art, and philosophy is not entirely free from prejudice. At times, references to Chinese thought are handled lightly and in a satirical manner. Allusions to Chinese philosophy, especially of the Confucian and Taoist variety, have been taken out of their context and has been considerably molded to the of his play. This has been one very prominent accusation against Brecht, that he has borrowed some certain ideas from Chinese culture and philosophy, then have twisted and molded these ideas to suit the logic of his plays. And this is exactly where in cultural appropriation of beliefs, of literature, and philosophical systems have been questioned. That when such beliefs and philosophical and cultural systems are taken out of their context, there is always a possibility of misrepresentation and which interpretation may happen. Brecht's representation of China in The Good Person of Sichuan reveals a thoughtful yet complicated attitude towards cultural appreciation, borrowing, and transfer. As a creative artist, he applied his own vision while reading Chinese history, culture, and philosophy to support his own worldview and thoughts on social reform. Uh, I have two or more observations to offer, and then I will come to the conclusion of this particular speech, this particular presentation. The depiction of Chinese color and geography in the play called Good Person of Sichuan suggests a nuanced and complex engagement the playwright than has often been perceived. The utilization of Chinese markers and motifs in the play shows his continual fascination with the Middle Kingdom, which is of China. However, one could add in Brecht's defense that the good person is a didactical play rather than a fake realistic portrayal of Chinese culture. By splitting the character of his protagonist Shen down the middle into two irreconcilable parts, they intended to show that uh, in aggressive and unjust societies, good can only survive by means of evil. Understanding the Chinese setting of the play as an artificial construct, a figment of imagination, may be helpful in interpreting various degrees of authenticity in which the text simultaneously floats. The overlapping modes of engagement with China in the good person of Sichuan enables Brecht to reconcile his admiration for traditional Chinese culture with his modernist aesthetic and his thoughts on Marxism. The drama conceals a more meaningful relationship to China behind an outwardly superficial Chinese exterior. It has more to talk about China than only the characters and the setting. In addition, Brecht engages with the real geopolitical entity of China through his indirect references to contemporary Chinese politics in the drama. As I have come to almost the concluding part of my today's presentation, I will just bring here an observation from Michael Bowden, who has given us some idea about how, because this particular relationship of Brecht with China, it is a bifocal, it is a two-way traffic, because here primarily I have, in today's presentation, I have talked about how Brecht has been influenced by Chinese thought, Chinese philosophy, Chinese culture. Uh, but towards the second half, during the second half of 20th century, many Chinese playwrights, they have adapted Brecht's plays in China. So there happened a cultural interaction, transaction between these two traditions, the Chinese tradition and the German tradition of theater. What I believe Michael Bowden tells us is of particular significance as far as the context of intercultural theater is concerned. So by just reading out, by just quoting Michael Bowden, I'm going to conclude my presentation. Bowden interestingly says the connection between Brecht's work and contemporary Asian theater is in fact better described as one of cross-cultural appropriation rather than influence. Bowden actually, he throws a stone at the beehive. He calls this traffic, this two-way traffic, Brecht taking from China and later generation Chinese playwrights borrowing from Brecht. Michael Bowden actually looks at it from the perspective of cross-cultural appropriation. This appropriation is but then he is not very harsh. He says that this appropriation is a creative dynamic process of reinterpreting and retooling certain of Brecht's ideas or techniques rather than a stiff imitation of a transparent model, by grouping that lag behind that times aesthetically due to a backward state of social and cultural development. That that Asiatic theater traditions and the Western tradition are not at the same level. He talks about certain backwardness in the Asian culture. Certainly, throughout Asia, many dramatists and groups are attracted to Brecht's work because he developed plays and techniques that they have found useful in articulating a critique of existing power structures. So, of course, someone may say that I have slightly deviated from the context of intercultural theater, and especially my today's context. How Brecht has taken, or if we use Bowden's term, has appropriated materials from China. But since the first part of my lecture today was on intercultural theater, so I thought that it would be appropriate to just drop a hint to my listeners as how both the traditions have been borrowing freely from each other during the course of last 50 years or so, in which at times there were questions surfacing of cultural appropriation, misrepresentation, misinterpretation. But these things, as we know, they will always remain. Uh, and thankfully, that Brecht has Brecht has borrowed from China and from the Chinese tradition, that we have a very beautiful play like that of the good person of Sichuan. Again, another thing that I want to share with my listeners is that during my PhD research work on Brecht's theater, I have come across a very interesting book, which is Brecht is believed to have very interesting play, which Brecht is believed to have authored towards the very end of his uh, theatrical dramatic career. This is a play which is titled Calcutta 4th May, which Brecht is believed to have written in collaboration with Leon Feuchtwanger, another of his collaborators. Now, this play, as we understand, this play is based on Calcutta. It is on that very important historical event, the hanging of Maharaja Nanda Kumar. This play is titled Calcutta 4th May. It is on the tussle of Nanda Kumar and Warren Hastings. So why I'm bringing this also to my presentation today is because Brecht has borrowed from various sources, and here I have cited an example that Brecht has also borrowed something from India. He has been influenced by this particular part of Indian history, and he has written a play on this, of course, in collaboration with Feuchtwanger. But the fact is that Calcutta 4th May is more of an authentic, quote unquote, a realistic kind of a history play than what is presented in Brecht's The Good Person of Sichuan. Good Person of Sichuan, as I have already said, I am going to just repeat it once more as I come to the conclusion of my lecture. That Brecht is believed to have borrowed the setting. He has borrowed extensively from Chinese stories, myths, legends, and cultural systems, philosophical systems, as I have referred to Mengzi. Uh, but that particular borrowing was much more fictional, quote unquote, creative in nature than he is borrowing from a particular historical incident like the hanging of Maharaja Nanda Kumar. So that is how I come to the conclusion of my speech, of this brief presentation. I am very thankful to all my listeners for giving me a patient hearing. I believe Gautam is with us. Gautam, if you could listen to me. Yeah.
Thank you very much. You shouldn't be thankful to us. Rather, we are very thankful to you. And on behalf of all the participants and on behalf of our department, I would like to convey my heartfelt thanks and regards to you because you have agreed to deliver such a insightful lecture, and we are really amazed with your
Let,
lecture, sir. So, as I find that all the participants, they have informed us that they have really learned from this lecture, and they have told this no question I don't find over here. So, I think that if any question comes, then definitely I will transfer the question to you. I will send the question to you, and I'd like to get the answer of the question. So, right now there is no question from the participants. I hope that
sure.
there will be some questions. So, on this note, thank you very much, sir, for your valuable time. I know that you are very busy with other works, so you have given your valuable time and, importantly, the insightful lecture that we have got from you. And I hope the next time, if we invite you, I hope that your valuable time, obviously, we will get from you. So, all people they are saying that they have learned a lot from this lecture. So, thank you very much once again. for this
Thank you.
lecture, sir. So just sir, be there, and I have to just my regards to you because you have been very kind to me for a long time with different kind of projects. Whenever I have come to you, you have given your guidance as well as valuable advices too. So, sir, I'm just taking you off from the screen. So be there for a few minutes, and I'll join you and I have some few words to share with you.
Sure.
So, participant, thank you very much for joining our session number 22. So, this number 22 comes to an end but right now over here. But tomorrow there is another session. This session is international session, session number 23. And tomorrow's session is going to take place from 7:30 p.m. onwards. And tomorrow's session we're going to get lecture from Brooklyn, New York City, and Dr. Gregory Tauge from the Sir Francis College. He will be delivering a lecture on art and adaptation. If you'd like to get that lecture, then you have to stay tuned, and you will get that lecture from 7:30 p.m. So I hope that you will join on this very note. Tada, bye bye, stay safe, take care, good night.